Russian leader Vladimir Putin confronted the whole world, especially Western Europe and the USA, with his plans to invade Ukraine. Humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine came like a flood, especially recently. Israel's military aid to Ukraine has shocked the Kremlin. Israel has long abstained, but with Benjamin Netanyahu coming back to power, Israel's attitude towards Russia and Ukraine became clear as growing evidence of Russia's atrocities against Ukrainian civilians has made Israel's shaky neutrality in the war less tenable. There has been a growing temptation to support the Israeli government's military and civilian aid to Ukraine. The fact that Israel has a large number of military equipment that can be sent to the Iron Dome anti-missile system was another important factor that increased this trend. Despite all this, there has been a consensus among the relevant authorities in the Israeli government that at least air defense systems, advanced weapons and offensive systems will not be provided to the Ukrainian army until now. But Russian airstrikes have increased considerably in recent days. As a result, the Israeli government began to welcome the sending of defense systems, personal combat equipment, and warning systems to the Ukrainian army that protect ground troops. Israeli officials thought that the military equipment in question would be sent to the Russians without causing a crisis because the airstrikes and missile threats of the Russian forces also put the Ukrainian civilians in great danger. Therefore, Israel's positive approach to military aid to Ukraine has yielded results in the past few days, at a time when it continues to deal with a constant array of Russian missile and drone strikes across Ukraine. The Kiev administration has finally announced that they have included Israeli-made early warning systems in their inventory. The Israeli Ministry of Defense reported that Israel has begun the delivery of radars to Ukraine for early detection and warning of missile attacks. Ukraine will receive a total of 16 such radars, which will significantly strengthen the country's missile threat warning system. The first complex has already been delivered and installed in Kiev. The first photograph of radar was published by the Israeli government. In addition, the government of Kiev officially confirmed the installation of Israeli air defense systems in Kiev. The first use of radars will allow the Ukrainian army and people to receive timely information about possible missile attacks, which can reduce the risk of casualties and increase the level of security. The notification of these systems regarding the missile threat will be made using sirens or mobile phones. This dramatic military assistance confirmed Israel's readiness to supply such weapons. Still, Ukrainian sources reported that 3 of the 16 radars announced were transmitted at the moment, but according to reports, the system recognizes all types of rockets and missiles and predicts where they will land, minimizing the potential risk zone for nearby residents. In addition, the Israeli radar system determines how long it will take for people in risk areas to find safety. Moreover, as previously leaked Pentagon documents revealed, Ukraine was constantly running out of ammunition for Soviet-era air defense systems, including the Buk air defense system and the formidable S-300. It was known that these air defense systems constitute 89% of Ukraine's medium and long-range missile defense systems. But now Ukraine's air defense will be much stronger and safer thanks to the radar provided by Israel. A detailed analysis published in the Jerusalem Post noted that the time saved in such a situation would be valuable, as the missile warning system would alert the Ukrainian military if an incoming missile or drone must be stopped. This will help the Ukrainian air defense forces recover valuable and apparently scarce air defense munitions. Worse, the Ukrainian defenders may stop their ammunition if they consider that there will be enough time and warning for people to find shelter before the rockets strike. In addition to this striking military support provided by Israel to Ukraine, the Tel Aviv government announced that it would export military equipment to Estonia, one of Russia's neighbors. According to the contract with the highest monetary value so far, Estonia signed with Israel Aerospace Industries, Russia's next-door neighbor. Estonia will procure high-tech, long-range UAVs from Israel, while the type and structure of the UAV to be purchased from Israel were not disclosed. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur was photographed with IIC Boaz Levi in front of a model of the Mini Harop system. It was quite remarkable that the contract was worth which 100 million euros. Under the agreement, Estonia reported that military officials from the country expect the drones to be delivered by 2024, followed by full capacity deployment in 2025. The current sale to Estonia will increase long-range indirect fire capabilities, according to officials. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur evaluated the kamikaze drones as critical and suitable for Estonia defense needs during the contract signing event. Pevkur added that the introduction of this new capability allows Estonia to attack a possible enemy from a long distance, increasing the range of fire by making indirect fire more layered and flexible, which means that defensive forces can hit. Also on the subject, a tweet from II revealed that this supply improves Estonia's indirect firing capabilities and strengthens its defensive capabilities. But purchasing a tactically offensive platform such as the kamikaze drone and emphasizing its defensive power does not indicate a desire to oppose Moscow militarily. This can be seen as an extension of the strict stance of the Western-led alliance. However, thanks to the step of Estonia, Russia can be severely restrained. The Russian authorities, who are currently experiencing serious problems in the Baltic areas, have become much more worried because of the long-range UAVs that Israel, one of the most important actors of the Middle East, will send to Estonia. While Putin is gradually cornered, the whole world is trying to do its best to stop the invasion operation in Ukraine. The only bullet found in the gun in the Russian roulette played by Putin came to the end of the gun, thanks to the military and humanitarian aid provided by the countries of the world to the Ukrainian army. The Russian leader who had his last chance was pushing the limits for the gun in the Russian roulette to explode as he did not withdraw from Ukraine and stop the invasion. Operation plans. Ukraine has many allies striving for its success. One of the most important allies was the United States, which has so far provided over $75 billion in military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Western and European bloc countries, Baltic members, and many other world states participated in this aid campaign launched by the USA. Also in recent days, strong winds have started to blow from the Middle East against Russia's occupation policies against Ukraine. Israel, which has been in an important struggle with Iranian militias and sympathizers in the critical area it is in, has managed to come to the fore with its positive signals to the Kiev administration against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So far, Israel has provided nearly 100 tons of humanitarian supplies, including water treatment systems, medical equipment, blankets and coats, as well as humanitarian aid, such as a field hospital established on Ukrainian soil. This military support of Israel has been a lifesaver for the Ukrainian army and its citizens. In addition, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz approved protective vests and helmets for the Ukrainian army at the time. However, Israel has declared that since Russia's invasion of the country on February 24th, it did not intend to send advanced weapons as the Ukrainians had demanded. As we see now, Israel is making every effort to send advanced warfare systems to Ukraine. In summary, Israel's military support and arms exports to both Ukraine and Estonia seem to lay the foundations for the New World Order to be much safer and more peaceful in Eastern Europe and the Baltic regions. In addition, it was one of the most admirable approaches in recent days that Israel set an example to the whole world in this regard, and that other countries did not forget what happened in Ukraine. The Russian Navy played a major role, especially in supporting the war effort of the Russian troops on the ground. The Russian Navy is one of the few navies in the world, and reducing the effectiveness of the Russian Navy has become an essential mission for both Ukraine and NATO. The majority of NATO's naval power is supplied by the US Navy, and for the US to be effective in the region, naval supply lines must also be present here. In this video, we will tell you what the US Navy is doing to stay active in the region. The US Navy rarely reveals the whereabouts of its submarines, but while US officials warn that Russian submarines are more active and carrying new weapons closer to US shores, it makes them more visible in the North Atlantic. William Houston, the commander of US Navy submarine forces, announced that since late 2020, his submarines have made multiple visits to Tromsø in northern Norway, the Danish-controlled Faroe Islands, and Iceland. We've increased our activity in the Atlantic. We're watching this very closely, and our NATO partners and allies are absolutely critical in this, Houston said at the Naval Air Space Symposium outside Washington, D.C. last month, referring to a base in Scotland. Houston noted that for submarines in the North Atlantic, access to these ports means they can replace people from these subs within hours, when it would often take days for them to enter Fastland. And so they said it gives them an incredible opportunity and an incredible strategic position to do that. So what are the benefits of these stopping points for the Navy? The US Navy focused less on submarine activities in the high north after the Cold War, but its attention in the region has increased over the past decade, as seen in its sub-operations and anti-submarine warfare exercises. There was a time when the Russian threat was waning and there were some higher priorities elsewhere. But the Navy is increasing the number of submarine deployments to the high north. A Norwegian Navy official said that in January 2018, Allied submarines entered Norwegian waters or ports 3 to 4 times a month to exchange supplies or personnel. Announcements of such visits appeared to have increased since 2020, when Norway allowed NATO submarines to use a port near Tromsø. In August 2020, the Navy said USS Seawolf, a West Coast-based attack submarine, made a short stop for personnel around Tromsø. This was followed by visits from USS New Mexico in May 2021 and 2022 by USS Washington, the USS Albany, USS South Dakota, HMS Ambush, and USS Newport News, all of which were attack submarines. The visits reflect the growing defense cooperation between Norway and its NATO allies. Tromsø gives the US a place to tow submarines, repair material things, and exchange personnel. Denmark has also opened the Faroe Islands as it can provide short breaks for staff, an absolutely key position for the United States. In August 2022, the US Navy released a chart showing the USS Georgia, a cruise missile submarine in or near the Faroe Islands. US officials said the Navy was working very closely with Iceland for short stopovers there, and Iceland's foreign minister said US submarines that don't carry nuclear weapons would be allowed to make short transits. Submarines stop in Iceland to exchange supplies and cruise, and this decision is a part of Iceland's policy to support the growing monitoring and response capacity of allied nations in the North Atlantic. In recent weeks, the Navy said USS San Juan attack submarine made a short stop for supplies and personnel off the west coast of Iceland. The first such visit by a US submarine, reducing travel time has a significant impact on what submarines can do at sea to return to Fastland for spare parts or to disembark a crew member. We routinely miss missions and even have to cancel missions because of things like that. That way we can get that guy off the boat right away, or we can get those spare parts right away and be there in one day. So that's a huge difference, he said. Some tasks, such as mapping parts of the Arctic, can be paused without too much trouble, but others are more time sensitive. But if US subs are trying to track down a Russian submarine operation or some kind of Russian exercise, a one-week delay likely means missing information. So what steps is the US taking to prevent the Russian presence in the region? Over the past year, tracking Russian submarines has become a more pressing task for NATO, and the waters between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans are vital to that mission. To reach the Atlantic, submarines from Russia's mighty Northern Fleet depart from their base in the Barents Sea and sail between northern Norway and the Svalbard archipelago to the Norwegian Sea, and then through what is known as the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. These crossing points at both ends of the Norwegian Sea allow NATO forces to more easily monitor Russian submarine movements. Russia's submarine fleet is smaller than its Soviet predecessor, but US officials and experts say Russia now has submarines with more advanced sensors and weapons, including ground attack cruise missiles. Of particular concern are Russia's Severodvinsk-class submarines, 3 of which have been in service since 2013, with a level of silence comparable to Western attack submarines and their ability to strike critical infrastructure, such as seaports, from greater distances. The Severodvinsk-class submarines worried NATO officials. Russia plans to build at least 9 of these, and US officials are already warning of their presence near the US. General Glenn Van Herk, in charge of operations around North America as head of the U.S. Northern Command, told lawmakers in March that Russian submarine activity off the U.S. coast is definitely increasing. In the past year, Russia has also deployed Severodvinsk-class submarines to the Pacific, so no longer just the Atlantic. It will likely take a year or 2 before it becomes a potentially permanent threat to the United States. 24 hours a day. In addition, Russian submarine forces were not adversely affected by the war in Ukraine. Russians are more active than they seem for years. Patrols in and across the Atlantic are at a higher level than has been seen in years. The increasing effectiveness and complexity of Russia's submarines is the driving factor behind the increase in U.S. submarine operations in the high north and the more frequent announcements about them. Part of that is making the Russians understand that the US is doing this during the Cold War. US attack submarines operated in the high north to allow the Soviets to keep attack submarines nearby to protect their ballistic missile submarines. The goal now may be to make Russia feel with attack submarines that the US is in Russia's backyard, so they need to keep more of their best boats at home to protect these missile submarines. The U.S. Navy has clearly increased the visibility of submarine deployments in both the high north and the western Pacific to try to influence the decision-making process of potential adversaries. Because otherwise, in terms of security, the United States would get nowhere. The distribution of U.S. submarines in Europe and its surroundings in this way is, of course, to try to prevent the Russian presence in the region. But Russia's expanding submarine fleet will become a major threat to the US and NATO in the future if the necessary measures are not taken. The fact that the USA has the most tense relations with Russia due to the Ukraine war and with China due to the Taiwan tension, and Russia and China have a historical alliance. If no action is taken now, it may lead to the USA and other NATO member countries in the future. The United States therefore needs to increase its effectiveness both around Europe and in the South Pacific. The Ukrainian General Staff released the results of striking Russian bases with newly arrived Russian recruits and equipment. As you remember, a few days ago, local news reported about a significant concentration of Russian forces in Mariupol. Then huge convoys set out from Mariupol and moved in the direction of Tokmak and Melitopol. And yesterday a series of explosions were reported near Tokmak, exactly where Russian forces arrived. The date was confirmed that the Ukrainians conducted several fire missions on the camps with Russian newly arrived records and also hangars with transported equipment. As a result of this strike, Russian forces lost between 200 and 300 men. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that 150 servicemen were wounded and hospitalized, while the number of those eliminated is being specified. Apart from the losses in manpower, the Russians also suffered losses in equipment. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that they destroyed one S-300 anti-aircraft missile system and 8 units of military equipment of various types. The Ukrainians also destroyed a warehouse with ammunition. Overall, this was a very successful fire mission for the Ukrainians and a very costly move for the Russians. In fact, Russian forces even started deserting after this. Today, Ukrainian intelligence confirmed that on the temporary occupied territories of the Zaporizhia region, Russian servicemen and mercenaries started leaving their places of service. And the situation was so severe that the Russian command had to organize a search operation. They allocated separate divisions of the Russian Guard for this task and already sent them to the city of Primorsk to conduct the search operation. But even when they find the deserters, they will likely be imprisoned for many years, which means that they will not return to the front. According to the preliminary information, more than 200 people are wanted. So in one blow, the Ukrainians got rid of almost 500,000 Russian soldiers. Half of them were removed from the front line directly by the strike, while another half left the front line in fear of being the next target. And their fears are justified because during the last 24 hours, Ukrainian aviation carried out 4 more strikes on the areas of concentration of Russian forces. And on top of that, they also targeted 2 control points. Ukrainian artillery units are changing the game in the east very rapidly. Russian commanders in charge of the Zaporizhia and Donbass regions were not prepared for this. Previously, Ukrainians concentrated their artillery in one particular area in order to prepare it for a counter-offensive operation. So at first the Ukrainians were overly concentrated on the Kharkiv region, then the Kherson region, then again the Kharkiv region, and then again the Kherson region. So Zaporizhia and Donbass avoided dealing with the concentrated effort of precise long-range artillery. There definitely were some strikes, but they did not have such a severe impact on the course of their offensive operation. However, now the Ukrainians have gradually spread out their artillery brigades along the new line of the most intense action. According to the military land, the Ukrainians have allocated 1 artillery brigade to control the Zaporizhia region, 1 for the Donetsk front, 1 for the Luhansk front, and 2 for the Bakhmut front, which clearly indicates how intense the battles in this part of the region are. We have already talked about how much it affected Russian operations in the Bakhmut region because, as you remember, once the Wagner forces suffered too many losses and were in urgent need of reinforcement, the Ukrainians struck the main Russian bases and ammunition depots in the region. As a result, the Ukrainians got the initiative and pushed the Russians from the residential area in the eastern part of Bakhmut. We have also talked about how much it affected Russian operations in the Luhansk region because, as you remember, the Ukrainians targeted the main logistical hubs and struck the convoys that were heading from Russia to stabilize the front line. As a result, many troops simply did not get to the front. Now we can observe a very similar situation in Zaporizhia. In fact, it is basically the same as what we saw in Luhansk. The Russians sent huge convoys of troops which were tracked and destroyed near the main logistical hubs. Never get into the front, and what is even worse for the Russians, those troops that were already on the front started abandoning it, horrified by this losses. Hopefully this positive trend continues in Ukraine.